welcome everyone to our job application and interview session. We're almost there, everyone, almost at the end of this fantastic journey. And I have the pleasure to introduce you Hugo Breton. But before that, remember to mute your microphone. At Q&A, please write it down your questions in the chat. You can start writing the questions at any time and be respectful with each other. And remember that the session will be recorded and we will have a group picture almost at the end of the session, okay? So about Hugo. Hugo Breton is an executive and business coach at Action Coach Halton. He helps entrepreneurs, business owners, and executives grow their companies, strengthen their teams, and build high-performing cultures. He began his career as a business consultant at McKinsey & Company, leading operational transformation. He later joined Citibank, where he implemented new marketing and retail banking processes. Hugo led the Latin American operations team for Riot Games, supporting the most popular online video game and the launch of four new titles. He launched a resume writing and career coaching freelance business and co-founded Octopus, a virtual assistant platform with social impact. I think you will talk about it. And he launched his firm when moving to Canada with his family. Hugo holds an MBA and an MFA in manufacturing from the University of Michigan. He loves writing, reading, movies, music, and video games, of course. Welcome, Hugo. The floor is yours.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Yvette.
Oh, we cannot hear you, Hugo.
I thought I had unmuted, so thank you so much, Yvette. And I'll be sharing a presentation, so I'm gonna spotlight myself so that you can see the slides as we go through them. Now, I'm gonna share the slides so that you can have them and have them through the mentorship application, or portal. So don't worry about taking furious notes about what is on the slides or the ideas. I would rather have you take notes of things that are big insights for you or things that you can apply for your own job search. Okay. So today we'll be talking about the job application and the interview process. And if I think about my big objective for today, if there's only one thing that I achieve, is that you walk away from here being much less anxious about the whole interview process, right? To say, hey, now I have some tools that can help me reduce that anxiety and prepare so that when I walk into an interview, I feel more confident and better prepared. So that's going to be my focus, but we'll talk about different topics, which I'll get to in a second. So by now we should be all seeing the presentation, and I'll keep switching on and off from the presentation as we go. So that was a big bio for me, but a couple of other things I wanted to share was there's two things that I'm really passionate about working on. So one is team performance, because that's how I started my career, being part of teams. And the fastest I can get a team to being high performing, the better, because I know that not only will they be delivering results, but it's also going to make them happier at what they do. And the other thing is I'm really passionate about the whole recruiting process. So I was a career counselor when I was a student. I then worked in a consulting firm to make sure that we were bringing best practices for recruiting. So I was shaping what the recruiting process would look like, training other interviewers, and then being very active in interviewing candidates. And that took me to doing a freelance resume writing and career coaching business, which I loved. I have dozens of people find their next opportunity, in many cases a career change. And then finally, when I joined a video games company, I was very active in just recruiting for the company, in spite of all the companies I had collaborated before, I felt that was the hardest recruiting process. So some of the learnings I'll share today come from that process, which had a lot of interviews, was very emotional, and was very focused on finding the right fit for people into the company. So to talk a little bit about some ground rules for today's session. So I want to make sure that this is interactive. So as Yvette said, if you have questions, just post them on the chat and I'll try to address them as we go through the process. And everything we'll see today, think about it that from the perspective that it should be helping you prepare. So we'll go through a lot of content. I may be running at times to make sure that we have time for questions at the end and we stay within the hour. But the intention is for you to grab those couple of golden nuggets from this to say, hey, this is helpful, because this is where I struggle. So even if there's a lot of information, make sure that you're focusing on, okay, what do I need at this stage that I am to get better prepared? Which gets me to the last thing that I'm sure, because I'm also mentoring, that the whole mentorship program and all of the sessions and every session in particular, they may feel like you're drinking from the fire hose. So again, stay focused and on what is the most valuable information for you and what can help you at this time. So I'm going to ask you, instead of trying to take notes of everything, because you'll get the slides, just make notes of those aha moments for you, which is what are some of the insights of what we'll see today that you can say, hey, this is helpful. Let me use that tool, or let me focus on this topic. And hopefully by the end of the session, you have just a handful of those, maybe 3 to 5. And then those are the ones that you can focus, even if there's a lot of information, which you can reference in the future. So that sound like a plan? So type yes or Y in the chat, or just do a thumbs up if this sounds like a plan for today's session. Okay, great.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. So let's keep going. So today we're going to talk about job application and interview. So the big topics is, well, how do you apply for jobs, right? You've worked on your resume. You define a target. You even learn about AI. So now today it's time to send those applications. Next, we're going to talk about preparing for interviews. So what are some tools that and even mindsets that you can bring whenever you're invited to an interview? And then finally, I would like to discuss for a second how you should start thinking about getting into a routine in which you're sending applications, you're following up, you're networking, in a routine that works for you, that keeps you active and gets you to the goal of finding the role you want to, but also that you're committing to it and you're repeating it every day. We'll talk a little bit about creating a routine for you to go through the search. Now, the importance here to think that this is strategic, and you need to be very strategic because the market is very competitive, and we know that as newcomers we have particular challenges. So make sure that you're being very strategic and creating what that routine and that strategy looks like for your search. Now, before we go into the content for today, I just wanted to do a quick reminder of making sure that based on what you worked on in the past, you're thinking about having a great elevator pitch. So that if I meet you at a networking event and I ask you, okay, what kind of opportunities are you looking for? You can be very clear on what you're looking for, what you bring to a company, so that as a networking partner, I can think about great connections for you. But if I were to be a recruiter, then I would say, oh, great, I would like to have a follow-up conversation with you. Now, I know that your target and what you offer is something you've worked on previous sessions. I just wanted to share this, which I learned from a startup program, which is a structure for a company or a startup elevator pitch, but how you can adapt it for the job search. So you see on the left that we have there my company, is developing, and then what's the solution you offer to solve or to help an audience solve a particular problem with a particular secret sauce. So whenever I share this around the job search, this is how you can adapt it and say, hey, my name is, and then you would introduce yourself. And then you say, hey, what are you a specialist on? What's your area of focus and what do you offer? So, hey, I specialize in developing, code or whatever your role is, or doing a particular aspect of digital marketing to help. And who's the audience, right? What are the target companies or organizations that you're looking for? It could be big companies, small companies in certain industry, in certain geography. So be very specific with that. Solve a problem. So what's the problem that you help solve with, and what's your particular secret sauce, right? Hey, I have 10 years of experience on this, or hey, I just graduated from this program, or I have worked with these types of clients. So what makes you stand out from other candidates? And we'll get back to that in a second. And then finally, you wrap up with a call to action, which is, hey, and I would love to set up a follow-up conversation, right? Now, the call to action, it depends on the situation, right? If we're just chatting, I may not have a very aggressive and in-your-face call to action, but I would typically say, and I would love to follow up this conversation because I'm really interested in your company, right? So in many cases, that call to action is going to be very important. So if you haven't practiced, just make sure that you have an idea of what your elevator pitch is, so that when you're having interactions, networking, or even crafting your materials, that you have a very clear idea of what your value proposition to the market is. So improve and practice, and you can touch base with your mentor of say, hey, this is how I would introduce myself whenever I'm at an event. Do you have any comments, right? And then as mentors, we can help you craft a better elevator pitch that brings out what makes you special as you're looking for your next opportunity. So now let's get on the topic for today. And the first one is to the job application process, starting probably with the most basic, which is what are some of the channels for you to apply to tech jobs? And the first one, what I would say is probably the most important, which is company career pages. And the reason is because some companies may not be publishing on other platforms. They may just be using their company career page. So for example, Google may not be publishing a lot of their positions on LinkedIn, but they do have them on their own company career page. Now, why I say this is important is because you may have a short list, and again, it's going back to your targeting sessions, but you may have a short list of who are the ideal companies for you. And for those, you want to make sure that you're looking into their company career page, you're familiar with how it's structured, how they're posting opportunities there, so that you get that direct access to the roles. Now, the second source, and it's not necessarily because it's the second most important for the job search, would be LinkedIn. Now, I like to talk a lot about LinkedIn because it does have a job section, a job board, but in addition to that, you can do other things on LinkedIn, right? You can network, you can do outreach, you can post content because it's a professional social network. So you can start creating an identity and credibility around your profile and your target by the information that you're sharing, right? You may be posting original content, or you may be reposting or repositioning other content, and then adding your own perspective. So that's what makes LinkedIn different, which is it has other tools that allow you to create that expertise and identity in the job search beyond just having that the job boards. Now we get to job boards, and there are sites like Indeed, Glassdoor, etc. And sometimes you may have even specialized platforms for particular industries or roles. So those may require you to build a profile in that platform with their own structure. So if that's the case, do that with time and say, hey, I'm on this platform. I've created my profile. Some of them may ask you to as well upload a resume. So do that with time. So whenever there's a role that's published there, you're ready to apply as soon as possible. And the last one, which is critical, and we may come back to it a couple times today, is networking, because you want to make sure that you're connecting with hiring managers, recruiters, and in general, people who work for certain, for the companies that you're applying to, so that, and this could be through LinkedIn, email, or in person. And the reason is because whenever an application is so much stronger, if you can say, hey, I have context for your company because I've had a conversation with this person, or I met this recruiter at a certain event. And in addition to that, it just gives you information and that allows you to perform better in the interviews, right? Because now you've done your homework of researching your company, of asking questions, of learning what the company is like before you get to the interview. So these are different areas where you can apply for jobs. Now, this is probably not as exhaustive. So if you have any other channels where you've applied in the past or you're planning to apply, please share that on the chat with the group so that we can also see what other options there are, right? But at least consider that you have these and you need to have the right tools and plan to make sure that you're applying through all the different channels that apply to the roles that you're looking for. Now you know where you are applying and you've selected a particular target. Then you may say, well, I want to start customizing my application for each posting. Now, the reason you want to customize and you want to, there's a couple of things you want to do. You may want to have a specific resume that either is related to the type of position that you're applying to. So I may have a different resume if I'm applying to a, let's say, an operations manager role versus a product manager role. So my resume may look different. But also you may even tailor to say, hey, this is specific to this particular company and position. So that's what happens, for example, with the cover letter. You want to make it as specific as possible. Now, beyond that, we have that you may want to customize because of the applicant tracking systems, or ATS, which are all of the applications or systems that are used by companies to manage their talent pipeline. So these depending on how the company is using and what tool they're using, they may help with the first filter. And what it will be looking is how much your resume fits with the job description. So you want to use specific keywords. If the job description is using certain skills and you have them, you want to make sure that you're using similar words or the exact same words, so that these systems say, hey, yeah, I found someone who has a good fit with the job description. This could even mean that your resume, and that's something you probably covered in the resume section, is structured in such a way that the headers make sense for the automation that is happening. So I just had someone share last week that they shared an application and it was rejected right away. And then he realized that there was a section around skills because the job description had very specific skills that they were looking for. And he was missing the header that said skills. So as soon as he added that header, the application went through and he made it to the recruiter interview. So sometimes even format can help you make sure that you're going through these systems. So again, how you would customize is make sure that you're tailoring the skills. You may have a long version of your resume that has all your different achievements and experiences you've had. So you may be selecting some that make the most sense for this particular role. And therefore saying, hey, this is the right resume and the right cover letter for this application. Now, cover letter again, what you and this may be repeating from previous sessions that you've had here or with your mentors, you want to make sure that your cover letter is not only creating the gap between your resume and the job description, but also creating an emotional attachment because you know the company and show your interest for it. Okay, so something that you can take home, and I'll be suggesting some exercises or things that you may want to consider, again, depending on where you need to strengthen your process for application and interviews. But in this one, just modify your standard resume to say, hey, this is really matching this particular application that I'm considering. Now, in addition, you may want to adapt to there may be things where you need to adapt to the Canadian workplace. One example could just be the styles of communication and say, hey, how is my style different than the style of communication here? And even in the job applications, you're considering this. I remember having reviewed resumes in the US for a couple of years, and then I went back to Mexico, and I was just impressed that there were resumes that had very personal information. Like they were stating if the person was married. Some of them even went as far as having how many kids they had and their ages, or even saying, "Hey, I do have a passport. Here's my passport number," which I was finding, very, very disconcerting. So you need to adapt to where you are. So if there's things where you feel, "Hey, I struggle because I may be sending an application and it's not matching," so just keep this in mind that, hey, I may need to research exactly what are some norms for job applications that may be different than my country, right? And again, just make that comparison with your particular country so you understand, okay, here's where I need to just adapt a little bit my process. Okay. Just going back to this point, again, there's when we get to the interview or this, just thinking about the interview process is, I do remember that there were several questions that or style of questions that in countries like the US and Canada would not be allowed, and in Mexico they were actually pretty common. So give me a second because I'm having an issue here with my camera. Okay. So again, research differences in Canada versus your home country to make sure that you're adapting through your process. Okay. So there's a question in the chat. When we customize
Yes.
a resume, we also put the LinkedIn link. How can we achieve a good balance between this? What do you recommend? So it depends on how customized and how much of a career change you have, right? Because if you're doing this just how we're talking about it right now, you're really tailoring your job application for the position. And if your LinkedIn is more general or it talks about your previous career, then it would be a little bit confusing, right? So now adding the link or not may not make that much of a difference because anyway, they may go into LinkedIn and look for you. But if there's a big gap between your LinkedIn and your tailored application, you may want to not add the link and just say, hey, this is my application. This is how I am explaining why it makes sense for me as the next career stage. Okay. So it just depends on that gap. And again, at least in the resume template that I personally use, I don't put in the link because I want to make it just about the resume. But if you do have it, just be mindful of that there needs to be, even if you're tailoring, either there should be a consistency or through your application, you're explaining why there's such a big difference. Okay. So let's talk about the interview preparation. So you've sent your application, they've reviewed it. There's probably going to be a percentage of your applications that are going to turn into that first interview, and you need to kind of measure and be patient with that, right? So it could be like, hey, I'm sending, for every 10 applications, I get an interview with a recruiter, or that number could be 100, and that's going to be particular to your situation and how the market it is. Just be patient. But now you've gotten to the interview, so we want to talk about how do you prepare for the interview. So when you're preparing for the interview, let's start with the basics. So first, you want to confirm the interview logistics, which some of them are pretty obvious. So you want to make sure that you're very clear on date and time, right? In particular, if there's any time zone difference, you want to make sure that you're being very clear on, okay, what's your time zone? Okay, and maybe even have this as an invitation so you have it on your calendar and there's no issues around that. Is this in person?
Hugo, sorry,
Yeah.
it's just me, or we are seeing the font blurred in your slide, or it's just me?
Not
Can
sure.
you see the?
So
Can
let's see if someone else.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
blurred. Yes.
Okay, that's interesting. Let's see. But you are
Yeah,
seeing the slide?
the past slides were okay or are okay, but this one is the font is blurred, and also your image, your
Yeah,
font.
I think it's just the internet connection, Hugo, on your
Oh,
end.
it's internet connection. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it just lowered the quality of the overall video that we are getting from you. So even you look pixelated. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Give me a second just to make sure that I'm connected to the right. Okay. Let's see. So I went back to this slide. It's still, everything still looks blurred.
Yes, a little bit. Yeah.
Okay.
The sound is good.
Okay. Let me try something. I'm going to change cameras and see if it comes back better.
It's better. Yes.
Perfect. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, because the speed is fine. So, okay. Thanks. If it comes back again, just let me know.
So we have another question before.
Okay.
It's a good idea from Prit. Is it a good idea to make my LinkedIn private so that the focus can be on my resume and my application, even if they independently search? How does this strategy come across?
Yeah, so it could come across as like, I'm sure that there's people who are okay with that, and there's people who are going to be like, hey, why don't you have it? Now, we don't have an obligation. The way I see it is we don't have an obligation to have LinkedIn. It's just such a powerful tool for the job search that you don't want to ignore it. Now, if your application really does a great job of tailoring and explaining things, I would say just have LinkedIn, but because your application is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. I said that I was recruiting for video games. I had once a case of someone who was applying to a director role of esports, which required so much expertise, like leadership, knowledge about sports or esports, knowledge about video games. So it was very specific. And in an application, I opened a resume, and I was surprised because the person was a dentist, and all of the experience was just being a dentist. So I was like, okay, I hope the application kind of explains that difference. And there was no cover letter. So I was just wondering, okay, why is a dentist applying for this very specific role? If there had been a cover letter that explained that, maybe we may have done a first interview if they were explaining, hey, I have all these skills. It's just that I'm doing a massive career change. And in a case like that, if the application was done properly, which in this case it wasn't, I would have been fine if I were to go into this person's LinkedIn and see that they were a dentist. So again, maybe think more about if you are not using LinkedIn or have it private, so therefore you can do a lot of the things that you can do with it. Are you missing on some tools that are helpful, right? Because again, many of us have gone through big career changes. So you want to make sure that the application talks about that and that you talk about that in the interview. But that there's consistency in what we're seeing. Okay. So again,
Yeah, one more. Another comment. Oh, no, it's a question. Are there any tips for cases where the recruiter reaches out to you based on your LinkedIn profile instead of you applying at all?
Well, that's a very nice problem to have. I would say, hey, they've already seen something on your LinkedIn without you applying. So just keep the conversation going and saying, hey, if it's a position that's interesting, just say, hey, yes, I'm interested. Let's have a conversation and see where it goes from there. But you're basically skipping the application process. So that's fine. Just go from there. And maybe one of the questions you can ask on those first interactions is, hey, what in my profile caught your attention? Because in particular, if there's a gap between your profile and the opportunity. But just keep going from there. So let's go into the interview. So confirming your logistics, date and time. Is it in person versus online? There's a lot of online interviews now. Many, maybe even processes that are entirely online. But you want to make sure, hey, if there's something in person, that you're ready for that. Type of interview. Is this with a recruiter, with a hiring manager? Is this supposed to be a very highly technical interview? Because your preparation may look a little bit different for each of those. If you can, who's the interviewer, right? So you could do a little bit of research. There may be cases in which the company may not say and say, hey, we're just going to find a manager who's going to interview. And you may find very close to the interview or right at the interview. But if possible, make sure you know so that you can do a little bit of research on their background. And dress code, which is, well, maybe just you can ask the recruiter in some cases, or you may just research the company and figure out, oh, this is a very formal company, so maybe my dress code should be formal or casual. You want to err on the side of being more formal than your interviewers. And then research the company, the role, maybe the interviewer, right? And go back to your application and review, because it may have been weeks ago or months ago. So hey, what did I put on my cover letter? Like, how did I tell? Oh, okay, great. Now I remember. So that you can go into the interview with that context. And is there anyone in your network you can connect with? Okay. So there was a follow-up from LinkedIn. So yes, there could be a scam on LinkedIn. So I got invited to being part of a board by someone in a certain company. As soon as I put that name on the company, the first things that came up were allegations of scam and the fact that to place you on a board, first they would ask you for thousands of dollars. So do a little bit of research to make sure, hey, what does the profile of this company reaching out to me look like on LinkedIn? If it's pretty empty, looks pretty new, that's not a great sign. And then you just do your research on the company. But you also, LinkedIn has the big benefit of showing you if you have any common connections. So if there's a common connection, you can say, hey, is this person legit? Can you tell me a little bit about them, right? So there's a few ways in which you can try to get away from scams. Now let's talk about technical interviews, which these would be specific for your area. If you're applying for a product manager role, then it would be about that. If you're applying to be a front-end coder, then it would be focused on that. So typically you're going to talk either to a hiring manager or someone who's very, a peer, or maybe even the person who's in the position today. And it's going to be very much focused on like the specifics or the skill that this position is looking for. So what you want to do is you want to look into platforms where you can practice. So there's a few platforms. These are all more for technical coding examples, but it could be that you just need to make sure, hey, to practice or find questions that could come into a technical interview. Hey, I'm going in for a technical interview as a digital marketing analyst. What are potential cases or questions I may face? And then with that, you're going in there. Be concrete. So technical responses for technical people, you can get very long in answering those questions. So just be very concrete. And here, just maybe practice on a specific question. Now, very likely that you'll also face either soft skill interviews or questions around soft skills. Now, the reason these matter is because we're all working with others. There's collaboration, there's teamwork. So it's important to figure out how you can work with others. What does your communication look like? Maybe even your leadership, if you're going to be sometimes leading certain projects. So questions for these may look like, hey, how do you handle conflict? How do you work with others? Tell me about a time in which you were working on a team and you had very, very challenging goals. What did that look like? So you can find out, and we'll get to a few examples of questions, but find out questions that go for this, and also make sure that you're preparing for the soft skills questions that you may get. So first tool I'm going to share with you. So you could put together an interview skill matrix where, if you notice on the left-hand side, we have the different stages of your professional life. Maybe it's a school you went to or university, your first, a particular project, your first job, or a few of the jobs you've had. And then the columns are different skills that would be required for the positions that you're applying. Hey, maybe they're asking for, on the technical side, to code on a particular language. Or I may be looking at a position that asks for a lot of teamwork because I'll be collaborating as part of a marketing team. Or again, maybe leadership. So just list the different skills you may be asked for, and then try to come up with examples or stories that link for that. Because what you don't want is to always be talking about the same experience for a particular role. Or let's say a nightmare scenario. You get 5 interviews, and in the 5 of them, they ask you for a teamwork story, and you're telling the same story over and over. So you want to prepare by going ahead of time and saying, hey, let me think about different stories I can share, so that they can see that I'm a rounded person around this particular skill, which I know it's critical for the roles that I'm applying to. Now, as you're going through the interview, you want to make sure that you're keeping track of time. And because at the end, it's, even if you have an interviewer, you should be making sure that you're guiding the interview. So if you get, let's say, a 30-minute, very quick interview with the recruiter, okay, I want to make sure that I have enough time so that at the end, I get some time to ask questions. And so keep track of your time. Now, different types of interview questions and the answer strategies. The most common one, it's going to be the tell me about yourself. And it's so common that I have a slide dedicated for it. But it could come in different forms. Tell me about yourself, walk me through your resume, right? So you want to be ready for that. You may have also strengths and weaknesses, right? So you want to talk about certain of your strong areas and how you're working on those weaknesses. We'll talk about behavioral as well. So there's a particular structure where you have situation. I may give a little bit of context about what I was doing and the task I was doing. And then what was the action or what actions I took. And then finally ending up with a result. And for certain roles, you may face brain teasers because interviewers may want to see how you do problem solving, or even fully fledged cases. Hey, here's a case scenario. Let's just run through it. Now, what's interesting about these two is they may sound like, oh, they're only testing for problem solving. In many cases, they're not. So they also want to test for things like communication. How much are you collaborating with the interviewer? So consider that you may face different types of questions, and there's a particular strategy for each of them. So let's run through some of them. So the first one is to have is that you question. So walk me through your resume. Tell me about yourself, right? Now, the way I want to think about this question or how you answer, think about it as a movie trailer. And one of my favorite movies and trailers was Lord of the Rings. So if we think about a movie trailer, it's between 2 and 3 minutes. So it's not very long, but it does tell me what kind of genre the movie is, right? I know straight away if this is an action movie, if this is a romance, if this is horror. So I know kind of, I should straight away identify, oh, okay, you are someone who can help us on the marketing team, right? So now it tells us what the movie is about, right? But it has cliffhangers, right? Oh, like Tom Cruise just jumped from that cliff, right? I wonder what happens next. Why? Because the role of the movie trailer is to make you want to see the movie. So this is the same with this answer, right? You want to create interest and to have hooks to say, hey, this is overall my career, but you've told me some very interesting things where I'm like, hey, I want to learn more. So, and again, you don't want this to be like, I've had cases. I'm sorry to say this to my fellow engineers, but engineers that may answer this in 10, 14 minutes, and then maybe sometimes we're halfway through the interview. And I've had people answer this in 20 seconds. So both of those are not great because they're either eating up time of the interview or they're so short that it's very hard to get to know them. Ideally, you talk about, from the time you graduated or from the time you started your career, and you end up saying, why are you interested in this particular role? Why are you sitting here, right? So that's the story you're telling in this answer. Behavioral questions. Focus, give context because I want to know in which company it was, in which project. But you want to make sure that you're focusing on the actions that you did, because that's what I'm probing. What are some of the transferable skills that you're bringing into our organization? And what are the results that you're able to obtain for your employers? So a second tool I want to share is keep a questions file. So as you go through your interviews or as you do your research and figure out, hey, this is our typical interview questions for the role that I'm applying to, start building a file with the most frequently asked questions and start putting in your answers. Now, I don't want you to memorize your answers and be a robot during the interview, but at least it gets you thinking, oh, I got asked this very, very interesting question, and I've never thought about the answer, and I really struggled in the interview. If you do some of that work ahead of time and you start growing this file with all the questions, then you start losing some of that anxiety when you walk into the interview. You're like, okay, perfect. I know how this question can be answered. And I've thought about the main beats that my story has, but I don't need to memorize it. Okay, so another tool that you can use. So go through your notes. We'll keep running because I'm doing a poor job of managing my time. But go through your notes, make sure that you're capturing those aha moments. So I know you've had a session on AI, And I want to talk very quickly about the role of AI in the job application. I've talked about ATS systems, so consider those. But also that some employers are actually using AI interview tools to make sure that they're filtering candidates, that they're analyzing your application. So just be aware that not only AI comes in place when you're doing your research, when you're building your resume, but it's also a major factor as you're going into the interview process. Now, a few tips on executing the interview more than the questions. First, you want to make sure that the interview is a dialogue with the interviewer and that it's not just you speaking for the whole time. You want to get them engaged and make that a conversation rather than just you talking. So be very concrete in your answers. Answer what they're asking, and then you may expand a little bit, but if they want more detail, they may ask for it, right? Now, show engagement. So you can ask clarifying questions, be present during the interview so that I feel, hey, great, like I remember you, and make sure that you're asking questions. And I'll get to that in a second. And then finally, manage your time. Don't bore the interviewer. So here, a practice that you can do. You can do either a full mock interview, focusing on creating the dialogue, or just make sure that you're just doing a short one, focusing on that with a colleague, with your mentor. So handling tough questions, strengths, weaknesses, failures. So for strengths, pick strengths that match the role and back it up with real examples. Even if I'm giving you strategies to answer questions, at no point I want you to be lying. So you want to make sure that if there's something that doesn't make sense with your profile, you're like, no, I haven't had an experience like that. And then the weaknesses, they have to be real weaknesses. Sometimes you may get these, oh yeah, I'm such a perfectionist, right? Or I'm too careful with the work I do. Yeah, that's not really a real weakness. So I want to hear the real thing, but also to hear how are you working on it. So what are you doing to overcome that that weakness or that failure. Now, after the interview, you want to ask questions, and because this shows interest and your understanding of the role. Now, don't ask things assuming that you are already hired. So don't ask for, hey, what's the salary? What are the benefits? Those things can wait until you get an actual offer and you're negotiating that. My personal favorites, be curious about the role. The second one is ego of the interviewer. Hey, Yvette, like what do you like about this company so much, right? And then the interviewer is going to be like, hey, great, you were interested in me, right? And they may remember. And then finally, if you haven't been able to show that you did the research, that's where you can come in. Hey, I saw this news about the company. Can you tell me more about it? What's your take on it? Last step you want to do is follow up, right? At the end of the interviewer, you should probably ask, hey, what's the next step from this? And then they may tell you, well, we're going to make a decision. We'll let you know in a couple weeks. So that gives you a time frame for when you should be following up. So reinforce and following up reinforces your interest, keeps you there in the loop, and you can express your gratitude. And the last section I wanted to talk about was just make sure that you're creating a job search routine. So you want to be consistent and say, hey, every week I'm applying to jobs, I'm researching, I'm active. Some of you may already be doing, maybe studying, maybe working full-time, part-time, so you have other responsibilities, but you want to make sure that this is a priority and that you create a routine that you're repeating and keeps you active and saying, hey, every week I'm sending 20 applications. And I love to say that maybe you're sending 20 applications, but there's one application that it took you 20 hours to send because it's one of those dream jobs that you really want to be very tailored, very focused. So look at your calendar and figure out, hey, when can I be dedicating time so that I'm staying active, and every day or every week I'm doing activities to get me close to the job. Now, a couple of things just to close. Interviews require you to have a very clear mindset. It's natural to get anxious during the interview. And I can tell you that my best interviews are when I don't care a lot about the outcome, right? Maybe because I'm already happy with the work that I'm doing. So those are fantastic. Whenever I care, then all of this starts coming. So what I did was think, hey, I'm having an interview. And even if I care, I'm having a conversation with someone who is in my industry and loves what I do, right? So I'm just gonna have a great time. And whenever I was able to get into that mindset, the interview went better. And a couple of things, we talked about a lot of things, so just practice. Remember that you're also interviewing the company. You also want to get to know them and figure out if that's a great place for you. And just stay persistent and positive. Like every rejection brings you closer to the right opportunity. So a bit on action plan. So design your routine. Make sure that you're tailoring those applications and prepare for the interviews. So this is a quick QR code for the 2 resources that I shared. So just a template with the interview skill matrix and a first set of questions that you can answer in your question file. I'll just leave it up for a couple more seconds, but I'll make sure to send this to the Hispanotech team so that you can go into that link and download those 2 resources. With that, make sure you go back to your aha moments. And we're probably running out of time, but if there was any question,
Yes.
happy to
So
answer.
yes, before Hugo, before going back to the question, I have a question from Rafael. Let's have the photo group first, dear mentees, and then
Okay.
we can go back to the chat and the questions.
Okay.
Give us your best smile.
I'm going to try another one.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Deidi.
Thank you.
So, well, we can spend 5 more minutes in order to respond a couple of questions that we have in the chat. From Rafael.
So I can see them.
You can from Victor. No, from
Yeah, I can see
Rafael.
from Rafael.
From
So
Rafael.
you have the option for in-person over online. It's much, I mean, if you have the option, just choose in person. It's so much better to be there. It shows interest and our interactions are so much better. I was asking for time with someone today for my business, and I said, hey, would you prefer online or meet in person? And she was like, no, come and have a coffee. I want to talk to people. So I was like, okay, yes, I'll see you there. So yeah, if you have the option, go for in person, and if you can make it and it's not a logistic nightmare.
And from Victor, that is regarding the follow-up after interview.
Yeah, so
you already
Victor,
say it.
Yeah, so Victor's question on, is it a good practice to send follow-ups? Yes, absolutely. Make them meaningful, right? So and heartfelt. So you can say, I'm grateful for the time speaking. In particular, I was very impressed with this in your company. So you want to bring highlights of your conversation to keep top of mind of the interviewer. But yeah, so that's great. And again, after the time that they said, you can follow up with the recruiter, with the interviewer, just to figure out what has transpired there.
And this is a good one. Your suggestions about keeping motivation despite interview rejections?
That's a hard one. And again, the market, just be aware that the market is very competitive, right? So what you want to make sure is, again, that's why I chose that phrase. So I like that, because it was like, yeah, every rejection gets me closer to a yes. Um, and and I would say don't take it personally. So it's not you, it's the fit with the role, it's the market. So there's all other factors. Where you want to focus the personal side is to say, hey, what can I learn from this one, right? Can I improve how I'm sending my application? Was there something that in my interview that wasn't great? So you want to turn that into learning. And if you're doing that, you're getting better over time. But just be consistent and persistent.
And from Lisette, how can I optimize my resume to pass the ATS filters when applying for a position where I don't have direct experience? Example, customer service, but I see it's a good opportunity to enter an industry. Where do I have experience?
So if possible, I mean, if it's completely separate, it gets a little bit more challenging. But if possible, you want to look at the list of skills and just figure out, hey, is there something that I've done in the past that looks like this? And you want to make sure that you're matching the language, but then you want to make sure that your cover letter has to be fantastic around that and explain why this is a good change of a career for you, and create that and kind of close that gap. Now, in other cases, we just to be self-aware, and just recognize, hey, maybe there's such a big gap that this doesn't make sense. Again, going back to my recruiter days, I got applications to be directors, which one of the requirements was 15 years of experience managing teams. And I got high school students applying, right? So there's no way a high school student can do such an amazing job on their resume and their cover letter to convince me that they can do a director's job. So just also be self-aware of that gap.
Thank you. And well, the rest are very nice comments. Thank you from Gabi, Roberto, Free, Rafael, Paula. Was a great presentation. And
Okay.
Victoria, the last question, how do you manage an 11-year career gap in the resume
Okay.
through the ATS system?
Yeah. So the ATS system may be harder depending on how it's set up, right? So they may be looking for recent experiences. Now, you may have some freelance experience. If you had some freelance experience or education, you want to highlight those. Hey, I've gotten active again by doing this, right? And that may help with the automated filtering. But you want to make sure that it doesn't sound like, hey, I've been doing nothing, or that it's clear why you're coming back, right? And you want to make sure that both your application, but also it comes out in the interview, and say, hey, this is what I've been doing for you'll see there that there's a gap. Let me explain why that is and why it makes sense for me to be applying at this time. In particular, once you get to the interview, you want to make sure that those difficult things, you want to be addressing them head on. So, but yeah, so what are some of the things that you've been doing, that you've been learning during that gap that makes you a stronger candidate today? And some of them may be difficult to think, but in other cases it could be like, hey, yeah, because in that gap I've been doing these things which have helped me build skills that are very relevant for the role.
Okay. Well, I think we come to an end of your presentation. Thank you very much. Hugo was very insightful, and we love the format that you will share with us your presentation as well, right?
Okay. Yeah,
So,
and I'll share the slides, as well as the you'll get a link to the resources if they're helpful. So, but thank you for your time, and I know we ran through the content, but I wanted, again, just focus on the key things for you at this moment, and you can always go back and say, okay, now I can work on these other couple things. Okay, just be very focused. Thank you.
Thank you again, Hugo. And thank you everyone for attending tonight's session. Have everyone a wonderful night.